Can you guys hear me now? All right. So yes, it does work, and we can go back. Thank you, Sachin. I think this has been amazing today. I've learned so much, and these are the kind of events that really help us all connect the dots that we're all trying to do at work. And thanks, Prasad, for doing a lot of what I was going to cover, helping me sort of like set the stage here. Thank you. So we'll talk about building products in niche B2B markets. When you have a grand vision, but you have to have laser focus, that's going to be one of the areas that we'll continue to discover throughout this session. A little bit about myself. Sonia, Sarao is my full name. I work at Fluxx as VP of Product and Engineering, and we started in a niche market, and our vision is really great. We want to disrupt the philanthropic market and really have a connected marketplace there. I'm also the San Francisco chapter co-lead for Women in Product, and our mission is to really connect and empower women in product management and advance equal representation. As you can see, my Twitter handle is Connecting John, so apparently I have some affinity for the word connect. Let's talk about niche markets. What is a niche market? We talk about, you can disrupt anything, but a niche market is where you actually usually start. So any subset of the market that your product is trying to solve problems for is a niche market. I mean, you can dissect it many, many different ways. But let's go through some examples that might actually, you might find them, that you've experienced them or may be helpful as you're thinking about your product. So Atlassian, I think everybody probably these days is using Jira in their companies. They started with their product Jira for developers. So that was their original focus. But that doesn't mean that they weren't planning to disrupt and be part of Fortune 500 companies. And similarly, Square, that's the mobile payment point of sale system. And it started with artisans and street vendors. That was their main focus at the time, but that doesn't mean Jack Dorsey wasn't thinking about taking over the world. They had planned that this is the future for all the point of sale systems that they could disrupt. They could actually have a huge market there. And another example, obviously, the company that I work for, Fluxx, we have multiple product lines now, and again, as I said, our vision is to really create this philanthropic marketplace, but we started with focusing on private foundations. So throughout this discussion, we'll go through just these three stages with the lens on customers, team and process, and KPIs. And I have an asterisk here for scaling, because I think scaling, when you get to that stage, you will have to figure out what works and what doesn't work. So there isn't a standard set, but I'll cover a little bit in that stage as well. So starting with, how do you get started? Like, you have an idea, you have money, so we're gonna start building the product. If there is one takeaway that you can take from this discussion today, it's focus. If you are in any way trying to start a company or a part of a startup and you're focusing on a niche market, focus is critical. Everybody says that, but I cannot emphasize enough that in niche markets, especially when it's not like in our sector, like philanthropy, they are 20 years behind in digital transformation. So for us, it's super important that we understand what are their challenges and how do we build products for them. Let's start with customers. So usually, when you are in a niche market, you want to have your targeted customer set where you know that they will be influential. And that doesn't mean that they have to have big brands. I mean, it certainly helps. In our case, our private foundations, like, we got few of the big foundations, and then from there on, like, our market started expanding. But even in the case of Square, like when you're talking about artisans and street vendors, they are influential in their own market. So, and then I think even in our earlier discussions today, people talked about diffusion of innovations graph. So in any company, in any startup, like, you're starting with innovators and early adopters, so that's usually your target market. And they have to be bold. They are taking a chance on you. So they are taking a risk on a new product. So you know that they are going to be those risk takers. And this is, again, I think you mentioned a little bit around engagement as well, Prasad, but in niche markets, it's super important that you have those early adopters and innovators that are trying your product, that they're really highly engaged. You want to really understand early on, like, what are the problems, and could we scale the solution that you're building to the larger niche market and beyond. Another thing to note here is one thing that always is important is to pay attention to the unique attributes of the target customers in your niche. You are always looking at what is the pain point, but there is some characteristic that actually defines your customer. So this is a little bit more subjective, a little bit more qualitative, but I'll go through a couple of examples to sort of like discuss what I actually mean. So when Atlassian started with Jira, their focus was on developers. So why did Jira take off? Jira was actually pretty comprehensive and pretty complex. And they were able to actually capture that market because developers actually love to have control over how they want to track their bugs and how they want to actually implement that system for themselves. So that unique characteristics of developers, that they actually like to have that control and they love challenges, was really beneficial for Jira. Had you given it to any other team, probably we don't know if it would have been successful or not. Lattice, I don't know if you guys know about Lattice. Lattice is a performance management system used by a lot of companies, and I think they just recently raised their round, and they're really making a big wave. So what did they focus on? So we know, I mean, especially like people like Prasad and me who've like done waterfall and have our performance reviews done yearly, and that archaic system where managers were talking about certain things and you had to fill all those long forms. It's not a pleasant experience. So what Lattice did was, how do you make sure that your employees are managed, that you're managing their performance, but it is done in a manner where it is engaging. So they focused on companies that were built around high-performing culture. So those companies who really want to retain that amazing talent, and they want to make sure that they are continuously engaging them, whether it's onboarding process, whether it's overall engagement measurement, or just performance quarterly or yearly. This one is not a software company, but I just love that it's a great example. Fleet Clean. So they actually just clean fleets of trucks and cars. They focused on these companies who had fleets. And one of the things that we know, trucking companies and different cars and all that, they actually have to provide services on time. They have very tight schedules, so they only have a specific window when they actually can get their fleet cleaned. So fleet companies actually love the schedule flexibility, and of course, Fleet Clean, has a very high quality service, and now they have been expanding not only in the U.S. but internationally as well. Again, we talked about Square, so I think this story is pretty well known, but before Square, non-registered vendors actually could not accept credit card payments, and most of the market was towards using credit cards. So since they made that available, they have actually made the market accessible to those street vendors and artisans, and then of course they moved on to small businesses, and now they're actually going beyond that. But again, initially they were really trying to have that unique attribute being part of their value proposition, that they were making that huge market for their customers available and making it accessible. And Fluxx. So I think we'll talk about what the main attribute was, but I'll just post these quotes because I can. It's the company that I work for. With Fluxx Grantmaker, everything is centralized, and everyone has insight into their day-to-day work in ways that they never had before. Another one, the real value of Fluxx Grantmaker is that it frees up valuable time so that we can actually focus on what is important to us. Again, in this market, this is the super critical point for us. Private foundations love Fluxx as it enables them to focus on their philanthropic mission. When you're trying to solve, they are not growing their business. Foundations don't need the money. In fact, they are in the business of giving money. Their return on investment is impact. They are actually just trying to make impact. So for us, it was super important to tie what we were doing to the focus of making the focus on the mission. And another thing I want to note here is that I use the word love in all of these examples, because unless you have that love from the niche markets early on, it's very hard to grow. So find your influential product fans, make them love your product, and then you are actually ready to build your team maybe, or actually you already should have a little bit of a team. So at this point in early stage, your team is founders and a few others. Obviously, we go through this pretty much like in every conversation. The team has to be scrappy, they should be doers, and they're generalists. But again, in niche market, you really want to find people who are passionate about your mission at this early stage. Again, giving example from Fluxx, people who really want to do good in the world. You want to make sure that they understand the value that you're providing to your customers, and they can relate to it, they speak to it when they're talking to the customers, and that is actually visible in the product that they're building. And this is another one, at this point, again, depending on your niche, you may need to hire from your within the niche market so that actually they can provide more insights for you as you're building the product and the company. So hire mission-driven self-managers and sprinters at this stage. Process, again, we know this: ideate, build, validate. You should always be doing this. This is the ideal process. But in this early stage, the process is fast, it's iterative, it's imperfect, it's cheap. You're not spending a lot of time on analytical tools or anything like that. And you just have some basic or aggregated metrics. Process basically at this point is minimal. So if you are in this early stage, expect the process to be pretty messy, and it's okay. So some KPIs, again, you don't have a huge sort of like analytical tools or anything, but this is more like as at the stage. It's not just only for product. The way we want to think about those KPIs for early stages, especially in just in general, but also in niche markets, it's just like answer the questions. Again, your KPIs will be always different, but what you're trying to do at this stage is really looking at how many potential customers feel the pain point acutely. Are there any existing solutions, and why do you think that your solution will be better? So you can sort of comprehensively put together, like, this is the percentage of the market that we actually will target. How many customers do we need to validate the market? What is the average number of users per customer? Do we have a monetizable market? These are very important questions, and based on those, you can actually define what your KPIs will be. From a team perspective, do we really have a scrappy team? Are they working on acquiring new customers and or helping with adoption for the existing customers and their users? How many tools are they using? If you have like 3 people and you've bought Data Studio and $10,000 a month rate, probably not a good idea. Like, you really need to figure out like what is the cost at that point, and are we putting resources where they matter? Product, again, I'm a huge fan of directly engaging with our customers. Sometimes you're not able to do that, and then surveys and other things help. But in niche markets, it's super important to build that relationship, to make sure that you continuously are evaluating that whatever solution we are building, whatever solution we are providing, that it is going to actually be valuable. And again, your influential champions, fans, that they'll be able to speak to their counterparts and peers at conferences and other things. That's another thing about niche markets. They all huddle together at one point or another. Like, look at us, all product people here. So it's important that at that point, with that engagement, with that sort of like building that rapport there, like, you're actually getting people to talk about you. You want to make, obviously, you want to make sure that you're understanding the feedback, sentiment, and then early on, it's important to at least start understanding if there are bugs. Again, you don't want to have the foundation that's strong. So not that your code quality is not going to be super great at that point, it's an early stage, but still start looking at indicators, how are the customers experiencing your product? How many are requesting new features? That actually is an indication they are engaged and they want to expand the product. And do they feel supported? So last point, I think it's going to be from a metrics perspective. What features are they using, and what do they absolutely love? How many are willing to provide testimonials and referrals and other things? So again, I think most of the other pieces are probably important for every market, whatever you're building, whichever sector you are in. But last point, traction, it's that you have to really try to understand what is your traction in that particular niche market that you're building in. So this will be our theme for the other stages as well. But again, try to make sure that you are always paying attention to number of your super users and whether they are shouting from the rooftops about your product. So your month-over-month revenue is going up, quarter-over-quarter, year-over-year, whatever your metrics is, and then you maybe have gotten new funding, so we're going to grow. Again, cannot emphasize enough, even at this stage, focus is still very critical. So who are your customers at this point? Again, they're early majority now, again, from the law of diffusion of innovations. People, they're not as risk takers. So there are times when usually you find them risk averse. They're like, okay, people have tested it. Somebody has given me that this is the product I should use, so I'm going to use it. And at this point, you're starting to build some formal engagement channels. And then few could be demanding. So this is an important point. Acquire your customers with the product you have or you're already building. And I think Prasad mentioned that you don't want to create that bespoke product. And that's a really big challenge in niche markets. When I'll give an example from our company, we had all these big foundations and more were coming on board as we started to grow. So those big foundations, we want their logo, but they also want some custom development done. So like, how do you find that right balance where you're not just catering to few of those customers and hindering your resources from sort of like innovating and moving towards your overall goal to acquire bigger market. So pay close attention to how you acquire your followers in your niche market at this stage. Team, so you have more team members, you've added probably a little bit more strategic people, you've added managers, specialists, but again, you still, at this stage, it's still important that you have people who are actually passionate about your mission. And sometimes expertise in the niche is important, and it becomes more important as you continue to grow because you're now trying to acquire those customers who have those pain points, and if you find people who've actually experienced them, again, they're going to be your best spokespeople. So you're building the house, make sure that the foundation is strong and you actually have mission-driven leaders and subject matter expertise at this stage. Process, at this point, it's a little bit formalized. You have some frameworks that you're working towards, you have some advanced tools, and you have some nuanced metrics. It's a little bit more defined at this point. Process is iterative and continuously evolving. Looking at the KPIs, so growth stage KPIs, you're pretty much like you're focusing on what you focused on in early stage, but you're expanding sort of like your strategic thinking now. What is our current target market share? How many new customers are we targeting to get per month, quarter, year, whatever your timeline might be? And are we expanding within our niche? Is our customer base growing? Are we expanding within the niche, or are we organically attracting adjacent or new markets? That's an important one. In our case, we had private foundations. We realized that community foundations have very similar needs. Corporate foundations have very similar needs. Government, when they give grants, have very similar needs. So how do you continue to expand through the solution that you have? And is there, do you have to do a lot more work to get into those verticals, or is it that very natural, organic, and it's just adoption just happens? Another point here to note is churn. This is the point where you want to start noticing churn. Again, in niche markets, it's important. Just like that you have your influential fans, if they start hating you, you're going to have that same ripple effect, which has actually helped you start growing at this stage. From a team perspective, you want to start looking at growth and retention rates, and then which functions are you investing. At this point, usually you start looking at product marketing and other things, but obviously you want to make sure that it is aligned with the company goals. And your customers, you want to really make sure that at this point they feel like they're feeling supported. You're always looking at your cost. From a product perspective, Again, do not ever give up on direct meetings. Do not ever give up on direct customer engagement, even as you continue to grow. Niche markets, it's super important too. So at this point, you're looking at, are we able to upsell within our existing customer base? Are we measuring data points across different segments? And are we monitoring our tech debt? So that's why I have this KPI. What percentage of your roadmap is given to tech enhancements? Again, tech debt can sometimes be very fateful for companies at this stage. Laura Moreno, I think, gave a talk at Women in Product last week. She's a SVP of Products at Lever, and she mentioned this stat which stuck with me. 60% of the companies actually fail in this time frame, in their teenage years. And one of the reasons is technical debt, that you're not able to really focus on product quality and continue to innovate. Traction, what features are our customers using? What do they absolutely love? And again, at this point, you start looking at NPS, CSAT, and other things. So you become a little bit more automated. But again, pay close attention to your traction in this stage for your niche market. So as you continue to grow, obviously your customer base is growing, whether it's within or adjacent target markets. Your team is growing. You have multiple autonomous product and other teams. Then you have processes. At this point, you can fairly say, like, as you continue to grow, that your processes are becoming more and more robust. And again, this is probably something you probably already know, but I do want to make a point of stating it here. Growth is not scale. You want to make sure that when you're moving from growth to scaling stage, you're not adding a lot of cost. Sustained growth needs a lot of resources, and when you're looking within your market, if you're expanding within your niche market or going beyond that, you want to really look at how are you going to scale. So make sure that you don't need to add more cost when you enter that scaling stage. Scale is achieved by increasing revenue without incurring significant cost. I mean, that's a point that you want to make sure that you always keep in mind. So the last stage, customers, late majority laggards are like, okay, everything has been proven, everybody has adopted it, there is no risk, okay, we'll take it on. You right now have multiple layered acquisition channels, you're partnering, you're going through integrations, and your product has a brand recognition and attraction. Again, do note this point that acquiring new customers shouldn't increase your cost much. You want to focus more on R&D and innovation and acquiring other adjacent markets, or like just growing at a very high fast pace without adding any additional resources. Team, probably at this point it's more independent. It's you have growing departments. It's completely autonomous, and likely it's distributed at this point. One of the things, again, from a niche market perspective, you want to make sure that you have robust onboarding, learning engagement, and performance management. You want to educate your employees on your niche as well as on your solution in a very methodical manner. This is, again, something that even at Fluxx we've experienced when people are very happy about, like, oh, this is a mission-driven company and we are going to join them. But if they don't understand, like, who our customers are, what are their pain points, and how our solution actually helps them, that can be a tricky solution where they just can't wrap their head around why we do it and what is the outcome of this. From a process perspective, obviously you have a more formalized process and you have a lot of frameworks. You're using multiple enterprise tools. You have many advanced metrics. It is fairly robust. It might be that you have different processes, again, spread out. But overall, at a company level, and from a product perspective, I think it should be pretty robust. KPIs, what is the current target market share? What is our planned growth rate? How do we plan to expand our market? This becomes important here. Are you planning to continue? Are you planning to build everything that you think you should and solve all the pain points? Or are you going to buy? This is what Atlassian did. They started acquiring companies that were in sort of their new targeted market, and they have done that very successfully. And there are other options where you can actually start integrating instead of having to build yourselves or start buying companies. Again, is your customer base growing, and what is the customer segmentation? Are certain segments performing better than others? So these are sort of the things that you want to start looking at. Again, you might have added a product line, you might have expanded into another adjacent market, but you have to look at who's performing better and what is the problem with whichever segment is not performing, and is it time to actually drop it? Is it time to actually put more resources on it? So you need to pay close attention to that. And I have mentioned it before too, specifically within niche markets, no matter how big you've gotten, you really have to pay attention to your churn. As quickly as they can grow you, they can actually bring you down as well. From a team perspective, again, growth and retention rate is going to be super important. Again, the functions that you're investing in, and always looking at your cost. Even at scale, you want to make sure that you're looking at cost. Do not ever stop interacting with your customers. So make sure that this is built in your team metrics, this is built in your company metrics, that there is direct customer engagement. What is the product feedback sentiment? And at this point, probably there are you're reading it on online reviews rather than hearing it firsthand from your customers. That's why it's super important to make sure that you have pulse on what is the sentiment on different product lines. If you are at this point where you have different product lines, how are people liking or disliking your product? Competition becomes important even in the growth stage, but specifically in the scale stage. Like, people are going to start to catch up, even if you were a disruptor. But if you are at this point now, is there a new disruptor coming on in the market? So those are the few things that you want to look at from a product perspective, but also from a company perspective. Technical debt. Never ever forget that you have to pay close attention to your technical debt at all times. Traction. So looking at what features are being used in each segment, what is that they love, and how are people rating your products and giving you reviews and all those things. So again, your metrics are changing a little bit. Like, you now know that what's being said in the media, what are the reports. Like, if there is in our space, we have a report called Ideal Way report that actually looks at all the different grants management solutions and rates them in each category. It's a very comprehensive report, so you want to make sure that you are getting good rating in those kind of reports, and your traction is actually pretty solid. So I've kind of listed this in a graph format, from early growth, scaling metrics. Basically, you're already looking at some of the metrics in the previous stage, and then you're adding or adjusting the ones in the new state. So again, from market perspective, from customers perspective, you're looking at competition, and again, you're monitoring how much are you growing and what is your churn. From a team perspective, you want to make sure that you're looking at how is the time of the team being spent. And are we investing in R&D? Are we looking at integrations, APIs, and other things? All the measurements of daily active users, monthly active users, it's going to change. There is a little bit of a difference between if you have different product lines, and some of those, like in our case, and from our foundations, they live in the product. On the nonprofit side, they only apply for some of the grants, and then they go back whenever a payment is due, whenever a report has to be submitted. So daily active user doesn't make sense for our nonprofit product line, so we look at weekly or sometimes monthly. There are some users, they actually return every 3 months for us. So you have to figure those things out as you look at growth and scaling. And lastly, as I said, traction is super important. You want to always pay close attention to your super users. In early stage, they may be just numbers. In growth stage, they may be a percentage, and then in scaling, you're really starting to look at what is the percentage of super users in each of those segments. Similarly, a number of people are actually willing to give you a referral, then percentage with NPS and CSAT and other things. And then it moves on to reports and review sites and media and other things. So if there are any takeaways from here, I would say it's this: laser focus on the problem you're solving in your niche market, And your champions, as much as you love them, are not your roadmap owners. And always pay attention to churn. Even a small percentage can have a huge impact in the niche market. I'll stop here for a second. Any questions? Cool, you got it. Let's build some products. So before I go, this is my plea: build ethical products, hire diverse teams, and pay it forward. And just enjoy the journey. Thank you.